Hey friends, welcome to Joyful Noise Learning. If we haven't met yet, what's up? I'm Ashley. I love to chat about Charlotte Mason inspired homeschool, affordable homeschooling, curriculum, and everything I like to do to help new homeschool moms. So I'm so glad you're here. So this video, I was invited by my friend Katie over at Life in the Mundane to share our favorite read alouds from this last school year. I love that she invites us to do this each year. I think it's a great idea, kind of a good way for me to document what we read, to make sure it's like out there and I remember what we did. It's also good for you guys to get ideas. And I love watching this playlist because I get a lot of ideas. And guys, I really feel like there's just too many books out there. There's just so many books I want to read. I pulled some off my shelf today that I want to read soon, and I was like, man, we've got so many books we got to get to. So let's get to reading. All right, for this last school year, we used A Gentle Feast, and they had their read aloud suggestions. And I used several of them, not all, but several. And I had a few more that were not on the list that I thought my kids would like, I hadn't gotten to before, and I wanted something fun. We like fun and silly reading in our house. So there's a few silly things and there's a few not so silly things, but yeah, it was a good mix this year. So first, I couldn't find it. I looked in my closet, but it wasn't there. But first we read The Princess and the Goblin. The Princess and the Goblin, and I was very surprised by this book. We ended up liking it. The kids ended up asking me to keep reading so we can figure out what was happening. So on one hand, I liked it because of the story and the adventure and the, ooh, what's gonna happen next part of it. On the other hand, I didn't love reading it out loud. It was really hard to read. It was an older English. It's probably 100 years old. I think the book's written like 100 years ago. But it was a really neat story, really neat fantasy story that I didn't expect to enjoy. So we did like that one. It took us a long time to get through, but we did it, guys. We finished it. So next, this was also from A Gentle Feast, but On the Banks of Plum Creek. Oh, it won't focus. On the Banks of Plum Creek. Holy cow, is it gonna focus? There you go. This was a Little House on the Prairie series book, or Laura Ingalls Wilder book that I had not read yet. I'd done Little House in the Big Woods, Little House on the Prairie. I read several times as a kid. And then there was, where is the other one? Oh, Farmer Boy. It's like, what was the other one we read? But this was the next one in the series, and it was suggested to read this year, and we all loved it. I wanted to keep reading and figure out what was going to happen. And just hearing all that they went through throughout this year, like seriously, this is only like a year, maybe 2 years of their family's life. And it was fascinating. It was just so fascinating. And again, the kids wanted me to keep reading. We wanted to see what was going to happen during the snowstorm, what was going to happen to the friends at school, what happens when the grasshoppers, oh, I'm not going to give away too much. Anyway, this was a good one. Sometimes we have read alouds. Those were our main like school read alouds. Sometimes we read things at night before the kids go to bed. And I ended up pulling out Ramona the Pest by Beverly Cleary out. I have the whole set and we haven't read it yet, but I was like, I think my kindergartner might like this one. Oh no, first grader, my 6-year-old, whatever. I think my 6-year-old might like this one. Maybe my 9-year-old would like it too. Maybe my 11-year-old might like it. And we have not read through Ramona's books before, but holy cow, why have we not read it sooner? That's what I kept asking myself as I'm reading this. It was funny, it was relatable. She got in a lot of trouble. She just made some silly choices and we loved laughing at her and with her and getting sad with her. There are many hard parts too that she was struggling with when it came to going to school. My goal was to start reading it to my first grader and then have him eventually read it on his own, but we all just wanted to find out what happened to Ramona and we all just read it together as a read aloud at night. And she's by far one of my favorites now. I can't wait to dive into more Ramona books. Do you guys have any kids like Ramona? Have you read Ramona before? My 6-year-old kind of reminds me of Ramona, and she kind of reminds me of me when I was a kid. I did a lot of silly, crazy stuff like that. Yeah. So now we're gonna talk about some of the harder things that we read. These were not fun and silly books, but they're good. They're so good. Trial and Triumph. We haven't finished it. We've read several of the stories and I was a little bit nervous to start it this year, and it's been on the list to read. We were following Ambleside years ago and it's been on the list to read, and I never quite picked it up, but this year we did, and I'm so glad and it's good, but it's hard to read. It's got really hard stories in here, but I think it's so good to hear what people of the church, people of Christianity have gone through in the past and how it is so different from what we are going through now. But I think it's so good to know and learn. And then the other hard one was Corrie ten Boom, nonfiction. There is the Corrie ten Boom story. Loved it. We all loved it. Oh my gosh, I read or listened to and watched The Hiding Place when I was younger. So I already knew the story. I hadn't read this version of it, but I thought before we jump into The Hiding Place with the kids, maybe we'll just go with this one because I know it's written for a children's audience and I know Hiding Place isn't necessarily. So I think we'll wait till the kids are a little older to actually read through The Hiding Place together. But we got to be introduced to Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy and the struggles that she went through. Oh my goodness, guys. Just what happened, during World War II in Europe and the devastation that people went through and the economy changing and the German occupation. And what I love getting from this was the theme of rejoicing, or not rejoicing, but looking for the joy in your suffering and trusting in God throughout your suffering. Because if anybody was suffering, it was definitely Corrie and the people around her. There was also a huge theme of forgiveness towards the end of the book. And I'm really, really glad they touched on that. And I know that Corrie has written and spoken about forgiveness ever since she was released from those camps and from the prison. And if anybody has reason not to forgive, it would be Corrie, but she chooses forgiveness and she encourages other men and women to choose forgiveness. Oh my gosh, guys, so good, so good. Okay, before I share my last favorite read aloud, I'm gonna talk about some picture books we read this year. I don't have all of them because we got them from the library, but we've been reading some of David Adler's picture books that are nonfiction. They're stories written about historical people. So Harriet Tubman was one we read recently. We also read the Harriet Beecher Stowe story, and I can't remember the other one we read. This one and Harriet Beecher Stowe for sure, since we were doing the Civil War era. These were perfect, and we loved these. And I really enjoyed them. They're a nice, quick, good introduction for the kids. And a good refresher for me without having to read a big, history book or chapter book. These I thought were really good for my elementary age kids. And by the way, if you didn't know, if you want to know what my kids' ages are, they're 6, 9, and 11 currently. All right, I have a nice special one. I almost forgot about this, but my husband read it to them a few months ago, and then they took a break because it's a long read. So we read halfway through, but Little Pilgrim's Progress. This is a story that was adapted by Helen Taylor and Joe Sutphin, this guy. He reimagined it as animal characters. And so he adapted a little bit of the writing, but it's very, very true to the original Little Pilgrim's Progress by Helen Taylor. But it's written, to match animals. And he drew some beautiful illustrations for it. And my husband is an artist as well, and so is my oldest daughter. So we loved looking at the illustrations in this. And we loved listening to the story too. So my husband read this one to the kids, and we read through Christian's story, but we didn't get to Christiana's story yet. But that is definitely on the list for next year for sure. So I highly recommend this one. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. Okay, and lastly, I'm so excited. You guys are gonna think I'm ridiculous because I am. We're currently in the middle of reading this one. Has anybody heard of this? Wayside School is Falling Down. Has anybody read this? This was one of the first chapter books I read as a fifth grader, and I loved it. I read it like 8 times. I don't remember it as well now word for word, but I could probably quote it to you a few years ago, or a couple decades ago. But I figured it was time to introduce my kids to the Louis Sachar's Wayside School stories. And we started reading Sideways Stories from Wayside School. That's the first one. And the more I read it, it's funny, it's okay. But I was like, the writing in this and the stories are not as good as this one and the third one. So there's a third one, but this one, there's something about it that's just endearing and hilarious and funny, and it is ridiculous. I have no other word to describe it but ridiculous. So we've really been enjoying this. There is some potty humor and kind of dumb humor in it, but it's a really nice light read kind of by the end of the night when we've read, Corrie ten Boom throughout the day. So it was a nice, fun, light read that we would pick up and enjoy this one. I forgot to mention our audiobooks, but we ended up listening to the second half of Corrie Ten Boom on audiobook because I got sick and I was coughing and sore throat and just couldn't read it to them. So we switched to audiobook for that one. And we tried listening to The Runaway King, which is the second book in the Jennifer A. Nielsen, the False Prince series. So we're continuing to listen to that. We haven't finished it yet, but that is another audiobook that we have listened to. So there you go, friends. That is our list of our favorite read alouds from this year. I feel like there was more. We did tons more picture books that I didn't keep track of. I hope this helps you and encourages you, gives you some good ideas. Don't forget to check out Katie's list and all the other people on the list for your ideas for things to read for next year. Please consider subscribing if you haven't yet, and you guys rock at homeschooling. Be sure to find his joy among the noise. I will see you in the next one. Bye.